Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Merit Rounds. I am Dr. Erin Aspenlieder, and I'm an education scientist in pediatrics and at Merit. So the Merit program is an education services program in the Faculty of Health Sciences dedicated to advanced health professions education scholarship with a vision to grow a community of scientists and clinicians to advance health professions education through research and applied science. Now, today's education round is hybrid, and many of us in this event are connected by the land on which we work. So I would like to take this time to recognize that McMaster University is on the traditional territory shared between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nations, which was acknowledged in the District One Wampum Belt. Now that wampum uses the symbolism of a dish to represent the territory, and one spoon to represent that the people are to share the resources of the land and only take what they need. Now, before leaving the stage to our esteemed guests here, I will provide a very brief introduction. So the title of today's education rounds is AI and the Ethical Educator, Balancing Innovation and Integrity in Health Professions Education. And we have three speakers, Dr. Erin Aspenlieder, Rebecca Taylor, and Kimberly. Now, Dr. Erin Aspenlieder is an Associate Director with the MacPherson Institute for Leadership, Innovation, and Excellence in Technology and Learning at McMaster University. She's also the coordinator for the task force on generative AI in teaching and learning. Ms. Rebecca Taylor is an educational developer with MacPherson Institute, coordinator and coordinating McMaster's Valuing and Evaluating Teaching Hub, and leading the Institute's Educational Development Fellows Program. And Kimberly is an Academic Integrity Officer at McMaster, overseeing the academic integrity policy and provides support to educators and students to help mitigate integrity concerns. Now they will share their experiences with generative AI tools in terms of capabilities, limitations, and questions of academic integrity. Now during the rounds, for those joining over Zoom, feel free to use the chat for comments and questions. We will have a Q&A period at the end, and you can also ask questions by using the hand-raising function. For those joining in person, you can simply ask your questions along the way or at the end. Now, without further ado, please go ahead.
So nice to see you all and to see you all. Yes, hi. My name is Erin Aspenlieder. I'm so delighted to be here to talk about generative AI. Thank you for that introduction and for the land acknowledgement. I think it is really important to ground where we are in place. And with any land acknowledgement, also really helpful to highlight the work of Indigenous researchers and scholars who are in the space of the topic that we're exploring. And so today I wanted to share the work of a group of researchers working out of Concordia, but around the world, who are exploring the intersections of artificial intelligence with Indigenous ways of knowing and theorizing what they're calling abundant intelligences. So a sort of hopeful vision for the future of artificial intelligence where we haven't all been turned into the Terminator, but we are instead thriving and flourishing using artificial intelligence interconnected with those Indigenous ways of knowing. What we are going to do over the next hour or so is talk about the context, capabilities, limitations of generative AI tools with a specific focus on health professions education. That's the part that I'll speak to for a little bit. Then Rebecca is going to take over with pedagogical implications for health profession educators, thinking about curriculum, career readiness, and improvements to clinical practice. And then we'll bring in Kim, our heavy, who will talk about academic integrity and what to do if we suspect cases of academic dishonesty. Questions, comments, gripes, grievances, points of contention, areas of concern with our agenda. Now's your last chance to fight about it. Okay. I recognize that in the physical room and online, there are lots of people with different expertise. My background, I have a PhD in English and Cultural Studies. I am not a computer scientist. I am not an AI researcher. I worked for over 15 years in the space of teaching and learning. I care deeply about teaching and learning. But if you ask me hard-hitting questions about artificial intelligence engineering, I'm going to toss it to Omar or somebody else in the room. Or somebody else in the room feels welcome to correct me or to ask a follow-up question. I really want us to be a dialogue and to talk together. To that point about asking questions, you can ask them anytime. Don't feel like you need to wait till the end. Just jump in with what you've got. All right, what is generative AI? You're familiar with artificial intelligence already. It's in your phone in the form of Siri, in Alexa, in your Google Home devices. What makes generative artificial intelligence different is it's that artificial intelligence using machine learning to generate something new. We could spend a while debating whether it's truly new. There are copyright cases before levels of courts right now debating whether the content that's created is brand new or not. But for our purposes here, we're going to agree that generative AI is producing new text, new video, new code, new audio, new sound, in all of these sort of different mediums. The way that it's doing that is by analyzing and processing enormous amounts of data from diverse sources. And then its training methods on that data varies really depending on the data set, depending on the company, depending on the tool. Some of the two most common kinds of training methods are reinforcement learning with human feedback. I always have to check the acronym in my brain first. And that's where a human person is looking at the output and giving some feedback to the tool on the quality of that input. An important one to know, because companies and tools using human reinforcement learning with human feedback aren't always paying those human workers particularly well and aren't giving them supports if they're looking at traumatic content. Some of the other tools use what's called constitutional AI, where there are a set of rules attached to the tool that they're using. And so rather than a human, the AI is checking with that constitution to decide whether it should produce an output. So Anthropic's Claude is an example that uses constitutional AI, whereas OpenAI's ChatGPT uses reinforcement learning with human feedback. Generative AI tools, as I mentioned, there are lots. The ones you'll have heard of most likely, OpenAI's ChatGPT is using the foundational models of GPT-3 or GPT-4. Microsoft has Bing. There are image generators, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion. What they're all doing is creating, in the instance of text-based ones, well-written and responsive text or video or image or code. What that could look like is if your video image is out there many times across the internet and your voice is, a generative AI tool could create a new video of you that looks and sounds exactly like you, but would be saying something completely scripted. So there's a very funny YouTube video of Jordan Peele, the comedian, has taken President Obama's video and voice and created a video of Obama saying terrible things about former President Trump, things that Obama would never say in public, probably. And all that happened with the generative AI tool has manipulated it. So real concerns there about deep fakes and disinformation, but really speaking to the capabilities. And as educators wanting to think about where and how your own video and voice might be used or manipulated, or your students might be exploring that. It can provide personalized learning through feedback, explanations, and translation. Really powerful for students who are working through concepts that they might be unfamiliar with or might be challenged with. You can have the AI function a bit as a tutor. So I'm going to show you just an example of that using ChatGPT. So if you haven't played around with ChatGPT very much before, Sam, can you see it on the screen? Wonderful. What you've got here, I'm using right now GPT. Well, that one was at GPT-3, but I have GPT-4. I've set it up here to be my personal tutor. So in the prompt that I've given it, I've told it that it's a friendly and helpful tutor. Its job is to explain a concept to me in a straightforward way, using an analogy and an example, and to check for understanding. And then I've given it step-by-step instructions for how I want it to interact with me. And so the first response that it comes up with is, hello, I'm here to help you understand a concept of your choice. Tell me a bit more about you. Can you tell me about your learning level, high school, college, professional? I tell them I'm a second-year student in business at McMaster University. I am not, for the record. Great, what topic or concept do you want explained? I'm saying I'm struggling to understand compound interest. This is absolutely true. I do not get it. Don't know what it's for, can barely, anyway, I see this is a fundamental concept. Why are you interested? Is it related to a course? And so you can see already that it's activating prior learning, trying to understand what I might already know about the concept so that it can then scaffold information for me. I'm saying it's part of this course, I'm specializing, got it. Can you tell me what you already know? So again, thinking about that sort of fundamental cognitive science of learning, having that base understanding of what we can already do. And then it gives me this great explanation of compound interest, giving me an example. I could then say, I still don't get it. Explain like times 6. And then it will do that. Let's simplify this further. Tremendous. I would love the magic box of chocolates. So you can imagine that for students in the health professions, that sort of personalized engagement of a tutor that can think about what they already know, why they're interested in what they're learning, might be a student who hasn't dealt with or explored that area in a long time. It's a new area of specialty for them, and they want to have that engagement that you as an educator don't have the practical time to sit with them and do, really mobilizes. Practice testing. I could show you another example, but I'm conscious of my time, so I won't, where you can very similarly have the generative AI tool come up with long answer, short answer, multiple choice, all kinds of questions that really help the student practice what they've learned. And again, as we know from how students learn best, that sort of reinforcement and repetition is fantastic. Explanations, examples, and analogies, how often and how well do we learn when we have something concrete to grapple with. Evaluation and feedback for you as educators. McMaster has released provisional guidelines on the use of generative AI in teaching and learning, and endorsed the use of generative AI tools for evaluation and feedback, as long as it's not summative evaluations. You can't use the generative AI tool to say you've got an A+ on this paper, but if you wanted to get formative feedback on something that students are submitting, you can do that. Summarizing and analyzing the medical literature. Super helpful if you're taking a PDF that is very long and you just want the bulleted points about what that piece is about. Many of the tools are able to do that. I'm just going to show you one more example, and then I'm going to talk about the things that are terrible, and then pass it to Rebecca. So I created this one thinking about family medicine at McMaster. And so the way I thought about this prompt was I Google searched family medicine at McMaster and try to understand the program a tiny bit in order to think about what you would be working with a student clinician in learning. So I want to do deliberate practice about how to interview a patient in my family medicine clinic. You're going to be my family medicine teacher. You'll simulate a detailed scenario in which I have to engage in a patient interview. You'll fill the role of one party, I'll fill the role of the other, wait for my response, blah, blah, blah. You'll grade my response and give me feedback on what to do better in my dialogue with this patient. You'll give me a harder scenario if I do well, or an easier one if I am not doing very well. So it's adapting based on my response. So if I'm a stellar student, it's going to continue to make that scenario more challenging. If I'm struggling, it's going to make it easier. Before we begin, do you have questions that would help you with this prompt? This last sentence I just learned about is a fantastic way to increase the quality of the responses you get from the generative AI tool. So it then asks me, thanks for those instructions. Can you tell me the scope of the interview? Are we focusing on a specific type of patient complaint, cardiovascular, respiratory? How long do you want it to take? What experience level are you? Are you an experienced physician, a medical student, and specific areas? So I just made it up. It's a respiratory complaint. My doctor usually spends about 5 minutes with me, so I made it 10. A resident and a focus on communication and therapy. So thinking again about what might be possible there. So then gives me my scenario. I'm in my clinic. My next patient is Mrs. Jane Smith, a 58-year-old woman. She's come in with a chief complaint, shortness of breath. The AI is now going to play the role of Mrs. Smith. So Mrs. Smith, appearing slightly anxious, not dissimilar to Miss Erin Aspenlieder. Doctor, for the past week, I've been feeling like I can't catch my breath. I've been getting work and I'm starting to get worried. And so the AI prompts me, how would I want to initiate the interview? I have a PG in English, so all of my answers here are just silly. But I say, great to see you. Do you notice that you can't catch your breath at a particular time of day or doing particular activities? And so Mrs. Smith responds, but then this piece from the AI is giving me feedback. So great job. You started with a warm greeting. Helpful. Your question was specific. But before getting into specifics, you need to find some more understanding of the complaint. For example, ask about onset, duration, associated symptoms to give a more comprehensive picture. Given her response, how do you proceed? So I was like, great, I should have asked about duration, onset, and all those other things. Let me do that now. So can you tell me when you first noticed it? How long? Anything else bothering me? And now my feedback is great. Excellent follow-up questions. You've used the of course onset, well, I don't know what that is, method. here's the things you might want to get. And the scenario continues, and it would continue for as long as they want, but I don't want to belabor the example. Last thing for me, there are a lot of things to worry about. You might want to worry about in generative AI tools what are called hallucinations. You could also call it confabulation if you didn't want an ableist term. And those are the creation of incorrect sources. So the generative AI tools, because they are predictive, they're not conscious, they're not aware of what they're generating. They will often generate or sometimes generate incorrect responses, but deliver them in a profoundly confident tone. So you reading the response wouldn't know that it was inaccurate. And so really important if you're using a simulation like that, you would want your students to know enough about respiratory illness that they would be able to check it. I promise this really is my last example, but I just remembered the other one that I had created. That was the neurosurgery exam. Where did it go? Oh no. Oh, never mind. Okay, I'll send it to you after. There was a great example where it was teaching me a lot about neurosurgery, and I was like, I would have no way of evaluating outputs that are here, and so your students absolutely do still need the base knowledge and understanding to know. Those responses have biases. You notice this is Jane Smith. The first name that is generated is a typically Caucasian white woman kind of name. You can, in the prompt itself, ask for more diverse kinds of cast of characters to represent the city of Hamilton in whatever prompts you're delivering. Privacy of personal or patient data, really important. You wouldn't want to take actual patient data and put it into a generative AI tool that is tracking and collecting that personal data. You can turn off data collection in ChatGPT in your settings. And in Microsoft Bing, if you use the Edge browser, you can use it without signing in and having any profile attached or any data collection of that information. Cost. GPT-4, the more powerful model, costs $20 US per month. You use Bing in creative mode, it's free. If you're thinking about plagiarism detectors, they don't work. So you just have to rely on him. And I talked about misinformation. The tools are trained to decline inappropriate prompts. So if you ask it, how do I bury a body? Or how do I hide a body? It won't tell you. It will tell you that's a crime. But all of those guardrails that have been put in place, you are able to there are ways to jailbreak them. So some of the concerns in the AI safety community really are around what would happen if a bad actor was using one of these tools to create a novel virus, for instance, to cause harm. Data is scraped without the consent of artists, creators, authors. So all of that data that's gone into the training set for these tools, none of it was obtained with the consent of creators. There are some tools now that are being designed intentionally with that permission in place. You could also think about creating a large language model, a generative AI tool trained specifically on McMaster medical school data that would be contained and housed within our servers, and you would feel confident that the data was freely obtained and privacy was protected. And they're terrible for the earth. Tons of water, tons of energy.
All right, forgive me in advance for having my phone. I have some notes that I don't want to forget. My name is Rebecca Taylor. I'm an ed dev with MacPherson Institute. I'm happy to be here. In terms of applications, where I thought it might be important to start is to acknowledge that there's already been a lot of great research on AI in health professions education before the time of generative AI, and I wanted to highlight some of the things that it's been exploring and findings from those. Before diving, I guess more recently into ChatGPT and the like. So we have research in recent years, but maybe not since November 2022.
Yeah,
that deals with forecasting curriculum updates and competence needs. And so AI has been used to evaluate factors like academic performance, age, and gender, and predict the graduation rates of students, and you use that to give recommendations on how to update curriculum and things like that. So it's mining data to try and make the curriculum better. And then in the Tamunal paper, there's an example there of using AI to evaluate language that's used in the workplace, and then make recommendations to update curriculum so that they're in as much alignment as possible, so that graduates are as prepared for the real world as they can be. There's a lot of literature talking about, we should probably talk about AI in the teaching that we do. So I won't belabor that point too much, but there's already perspectives and good arguments out there for why we need that kind of literacy built into the curriculum moving forward. There's also examples of enhancing the entire educational pathway. So the Mallet paper referenced here did a review pulling together all these different examples of how AI can enhance anything from the admissions process to outcomes prediction for when they're done their degrees. And they had a point that I wanted to share, which was that those kinds of, at this point in time, doing something like that where you're looking at such a complex, multi-layered process over time, one of your limitations is really the data that you have. So over time, this problem might be solved, but currently something like that is really ambitious depending on sort of the level of data that you've been collecting and have ready to go for your AI models. And then finally, AI has been used to help make clinical decision-making or improve the accuracy of diagnosis and make treatment recommendations. So what's interesting there's been a study done that compared human, machine, and then a combination of human and machine, looking at detecting metastatic breast cancer in medical images. And they found that the combination of human plus machine improved human error by approximately 85%, reduced human error by 85%. So humans did great, but the combination did that much better in eliminating error. And then there's also a lot of literature out there, I guess, happily, I suppose, pointing out that a computer can't replace all the aspects of clinical care and decision-making that we do. It's not great at pulling together all the different factors of a patient's life. And so while it might be able to help with some aspects, it's not something that we want to rely on, I guess, fully for the work that we're doing. Erin's already shared a lot about the ways that generative AI can work for us and for medical educators. So just to reemphasize some of that or to expand on it a little bit, I have a list here of the things that it can do. And let's not, just to be clear, this is not to be confused on what you should be using it to do. Can does not mean should. But here are a list of the different things that are possible with generative AI. So it can help fill gaps in memorization. Being a teaching and learning person, one thing I like to often refer to is Bloom's taxonomy. So the base level of learning is memorization, and then you go all the way up to more complex levels of cognitive engagement, like creating or synthesizing and things like that. So it really helps you great at those sort of entry levels of memorizing, understanding concepts, and that sort of thing. It can also act as a personalized tutor, as we saw Erin demonstrate. And also, NYU has launched something called Precision Education in their medical school. And so that is working with each student individually to help personalize their learning experience. And so it's taking into account data such as how they've performed on assessments, the feedback that they've received on their assessments, and also the goals that they have, and use that to tailor what they're tested with sort of informally in a formative way when they're engaging with a precision education tool. So it's very much personalized to each individual student. It can provide feedback, as we saw already. It can translate languages to assist with patient conversations, and it can simulate complex interactions. So one neat and local example that has come up is that in the University of Waterloo School of Pharmacy, their course on, I definitely need to write this down, management of oral anticoagulation therapy. They have a course there that consists of a 7-week self-paced learning. So maybe what you might imagine is your typical online course experience for 7 weeks, but then it's followed by a 5-week series of clinical simulations. And so learners interact with 8 different AI patients over the course of those 5 weeks to apply their learning and treat those AI patients. So that's something new that's been launched at Waterloo. It can also write, of course, these being text-based models, so your correspondence, possibly research reports, patient summaries, but don't forget that it makes errors. So it's not something you want to rely on wholeheartedly. there was a investigation done where 15 radiologists were given reports that had been radiology reports that had been simplified by ChatGPT. And they found that while largely ChatGPT did a decent job, it also, in some instances, missed medical findings and potentially reported some potentially harmful passages and instances of incorrect statements. So it's not something you want to rely on fully for your writing work. But of course, what it can't do very well is replace your clinical skills, replace your hands-on training or the mentorship that you provide to your colleagues and students, your experience, your critical thinking and judgment. And importantly, this last point is it can't take accountability for what you use it to help you with. So if you use generative AI to help you write your research paper, or if you use it to help decide how you want to approach treating a patient, if something does not go well in those scenarios, you are at fault for that. Generative AI is not. And so it's really important to keep that in mind, that it can help you. It is a great tool. It's a very helpful tool, but you are ultimately responsible for the outcomes of how you interact with it. One quote that I really liked in reading ahead of this session was that it would not be wrong to describe ChatGPT as a well-read, overconfident, inconsistent, and inexperienced medical facilitator. So something to keep in mind. There's tons of potential there. We've seen that there's tons of potential, but we want to be, I guess, well-rounded in how we approach. I also linked here an article that describes a few different ways that it is enhancing medical practice, or new ways that generative AI is enhancing clinical practice. So I focus more on the teaching and learning side of things, but here's a little list of some other ways that generative AI is being used in treatment. So it can be used for medical chatbots with patients. I don't know if that's good or bad. I've heard Dr. Google is not very great, but you never know. We'll see. Patient care in terms of making a tailored plan. It can help with diagnosis of disease, whether that be analyzing data for identifying patterns or for looking at medical images and refining those images. It can also identify patterns in research or identify gaps in knowledge that maybe you want to explore. Assist in hands-on training and simulation. That example from Waterloo is one. Help you with your clinical documentation, of course. And then with drug discovery, sounds pretty neat if you propose new molecules and things to try to create new drugs. So we talked a lot about the potential, also some concerns that we might be good to keep in mind as we decide to work with generative AI. Okay. And I looked out there for examples of I guess institutions or organizations that have started to implement some policy or restrictions on how to make use of it that I thought would be relevant here. So Elsevier, publishing company giant, has added a statement to its policy on publishing ethics to do with AI. And so what it says is acceptable to do is to use generative AI to improve readability and language. If that happens, you need to declare so in your work. You need to fact check everything it tells you, and it cannot be listed as a co-author, going back to that accountability piece that we talked about. Submitted manuscripts should not be submitted to any AI, and it can't be used by editors to make decisions on manuscripts. So those are the restrictions or the boundaries that Elsevier has decided to go with for folks submitting research to them. And then the Feinberg School of Medicine with Northwestern released a medical student policy on generative AI. And when I found this online, I got real excited. I'm like, I can't wait to read this. And I scrolled and it bounced to the top in a second because it's very short. So it was not what I had envisioned, I suppose. And that is largely because it is prohibiting any use of AI. So its stance is that the process of completing the work is as important as the final product, if not more so. And for that reason, generative AI use is prohibited unless a specific assignment instructions tell you that it's okay and exactly how you may use it. It then had an addendum to say, oh, by the way, your spell checkers are okay. It hadn't initially considered that, as well as the electronic, no, this is another one. You all know this one. The medical records, electronic medical record system. That's okay, but otherwise it's prohibited. So that's the only example from a school of medicine that I could find. It will be interesting to see how they continue to evolve. I think this is maybe the only example I could find, largely because, like McMaster, they're affiliated with the university's guidelines as a whole. But it will be neat to see how this evolves over time. And so these are some simple points, but some ideas I think are good to keep in mind moving forward as an educator, is to work with your students to do that literacy piece, to understand the benefits and limitations of generative AI and different aspects of your work, like learning, clinical practice, and patient care, and work on those skills to have those conversations. They might come up in appointments, conversations with your students, with your colleagues, and so on. Look to guidelines on permitted AI use in your workplace. The examples we saw were fairly restrictive, so it's good to be aware of your context, what's allowed, and or make and be very transparent about your own, because as this is such a new field that we're exploring, it's great to make it transparent with the folks that you work with, what's permitted, what's allowable, and what's not, and have that discussion. And then lastly, don't forget the right brain. So in the summer, McMaster hosted the U21 symposium, and a scholar named Simon Buckingham-Shum from Australia came and gave a keynote speech on AI and education. And what he said that really stuck with me is that AI is really great and appeals very well to the left brain. It helps make judgments. It has very clear, like black and white thinking, but don't forget your right brain. Don't forget your creativity or your compassion or all the holistic things that you pull together to deliver great patient care. So I thought that was a great note to end on, and I will hand it over to him.
Hi, it's nice to see faces. We've all been stuck online, and no offense to those who are online. We love that you're here, but it's interesting that I see people around the room, and I didn't actually even realize that you and I have had conversations, really good ones, not negative, until you were sitting. And then I could only see your face, and I was like, oh my gosh, we met each other. I met somebody in the lobby too, and she was like, I know your face. So I'm the academic integrity officer for McMaster, and I have two policies that I oversee. So the academic integrity policy, which deals with students who are committing academic dishonesty. And then I also oversee the research integrity policy. And so it addresses concerns pertaining to research misconduct, and that is applicable to faculty, staff, students, anyone who's affiliated to McMaster and tied to that specific research project. And so, as you can imagine, in November 2022, things got a little bit busy, and my phone started ringing and lots of calls coming in. And Erin and I, and then eventually Rebecca and I connected and became a lot closer, because there was such a huge concern pertaining to generative artificial intelligence and whether it was going to affect what our students are learning and whether it was going to be used to cheat in an academic environment. And so shifting a little bit more to that side now, away from the learning about it and the positives and the negatives, and really honing in on our policy so that you're aware of what is accessible to you should you have a concern with a student. And so first off, I wanted to highlight our definition of what academic dishonesty is. So it's to knowingly act or fail to act in a way that results or could result in unearned academic credit or advantage. So this is important to keep in mind in case you have a situation where you think that a student may have used, but they haven't submitted something. You get a communication that comes through to you, and you want to initiate that conversation. You have the ability to do that before waiting for an assignment to be submitted and taking a look at it. So we didn't change the definition that we use, and we didn't have to change kind of the listed academic dishonesty offenses, because our existing 118C to submit academic work for assessment that was purchased or acquired from another source fell in line with what the concern was. Although I have had some faculty that have submitted allegations regarding students and call that plagiarism. And we're not really overly concerned with how you're defining it in terms of an offense, because an adjudicator, if it goes to a hearing, will make that determination. But we did add in some language to help. So appendix 3 of the policy does zero in and talk about, definitions. So the definition of like plagiarism or inappropriate collaboration. And so added in a definition that I believe Erin actually wrote for us in relation to generative AI tools and what that is. And so if you want to see that policies online, you're more than welcome to take a look and use that when speaking with students to have a little bit of a better understanding of our definition as an institution. Also included in there in the last few years is contract cheating. So that's engaging with a company or a person, a being, and paying them for an assessment to be written or an assignment. And so some really new ways that we're starting to see that academic dishonesty will pop up, and important conversations to have, because not all students are going to engage in activity like this, but they need to know that you are supporting them and backing them in terms of submitting the assessments that are the highest quality of integrity.
Can I ask a question? Does academic dishonesty, does the policy apply to application materials? If I'm applying to a program and write a reflective essay about why I should come, it applies there as well?
Yeah, so it applies, but only if we find out about it after the student has begun to take classes at McMaster. Before that, it would just be part of the application process, and so that person would be vetted out if there was a concern. And so it does require one to really look at your application and ask questions about what you're hoping to get back from that application and written material that's coming in. Most definitely one of the calls that I got this year was a concern around a scholarship on campus that asks, in this specific case, for you to submit a written submission. And so the concern was, well, how do we prevent people from just submitting what they pulled off of, ChatGPT, because we wanted to hear about their experience and their life. So we added some language in terms of it being acceptable and not acceptable, but I think much like in the past, anyone could have written that. It's about those conversations that you have after the fact with that individual, whether or not they're able to speak to the details of their life that really will tell you whether or not it's their own work or whether it's something that they purchased. So when we look at a basic case, and this is the procedure that we have for if you detect plagiarism, inappropriate collaboration, cheating on a test or examination, the policy is really clear that we want you to have a conversation with the individual to talk to them about it. And that's really great because generative artificial intelligence is really hard to pick up, right? There might be those moments where there's those fake citations, and I have had some faculty reach out to me and say, I'm so excited to read this journal article because it looked phenomenal, but it didn't exist at all. And that's how I found out that there was this hallucinated citation that was within the paper. So there's stuff that really will kind of show itself to you easily. But when you have a concern with a student's work, you're going to invite that individual to come in and speak with you. And in having that conversation with them, you're going to be able to ask some specific questions. So a resource that we created was this, and it's basically a questionnaire. So as Erin had pointed out, detection tools don't really provide you with the same percentage that you can rely on as, say, Turnitin. So when Turnitin provides you with a percentage on material that's been taken from other submitted assignments or from journals and publications, you can actually see that material and know that it is something that's actually there. When it provides you a detection tool with a percentage, it's really basing that mostly on the type of writing that has been submitted. So is it a very basic writing? And is it following the pattern that they know that these tools are using? So what the most common next word would be in terms of a response. And so it really requires you to ask some questions. So some lovely colleagues at Conestoga College put together this kind of breakdown, and it is just basic questions that you can ask that will help you to determine whether or not something was written by that individual or whether it was generated by some tool online. So questions like, can you tell me about your assignment? Follow-up questions about, what the main topic was, what did you argue or discuss or highlight in this assessment? And then answering those, you're going to highlight and touch on whether or not the student could answer the question. Could they demonstrate a very limited knowledge of the question? Or did they have an answer that was satisfactory to you? Or did they demonstrate an excellent knowledge of the question? And when these questions are answered, you're going to end up with more check marks on one side than the other. And so if you're mostly in the green, it's probable that that student has written that assignment and that this probably isn't, in all likelihood, an assessment that's been generated by artificial intelligence. But if you're mostly in the red, then you're going to be considering bringing a charge forward, and that's when you might want to reach out to me to talk to me about what you've experienced and what that discussion was like with the student. I'm cognizant of the fact that for those, at least in the room, this is quite small. So question number 2 was, what was your favorite part of the assignment? What were some of the challenging parts? You can ask them, tell me about your writing process. So in the past, we used to say to students, can you show me past drafts of your assessment and see what that individual is able to provide you with? Is there a reoccurring term or phrase? And then can you ask that student to explain it? So a lot of the instructors that I've connected with maybe hone in on a word and a phrase that wasn't part of your curriculum. And so it's odd that that is there, and getting that individual to explain to you, like, why did you use it? What's the purpose behind it? What's the meaning? Provide the student with their reference list, select a source, and ask them why they chose that source. And then asking outright, did you use any type of tool to assist you in this? And it's really important that you recognize that although for some people sitting in the room, even in the small group that we have here in the room today, some of you are going to be very comfortable using this tool with your students, and others are going to be strongly opposed to that. And so don't make the assumption that your students know what you're expecting from them in terms of those assessments. Make sure that you're having regular conversations so that they're completing their assessments knowing rightly what they should be submitting. We make decisions on academic integrity concerns based on balance of probability. So is it more likely than not the student has engaged in the activity? So you don't require, a report that tells you 100% this is generated. You just need to pass that 51% and say, okay, I believe that this has been generated and I want to proceed with an allegation.
I have a question, sir. Are those items weighed equally in terms of determining?
Yeah, you would be. So you're really going to be kind of taking a summary of and adding up and looking at it. So, it might be a situation where you say, Kim, can we talk about this? Because it's really, really not clear to me. And we can talk about other things that you could look for and ways that you can kind of help you to detect. You're not always going to be able to, and there are going to be those moments where in your gut that something's off, but you can't reasonably prove it. But you might want to then come back and have discussions after that. So for the next assessment, really talk to your students about what you're expecting, what you want them to get from that. Because we find that students are more likely to not engage in academic dishonesty if they know that there is value in that assessment, that it's tied to you personally and what you're expecting from it, and if the focus is not 100% on grades. I have some suggestions in terms of reducing this type of use of ChatGPT if you want to reduce it, or just in terms of being clear with your students. So continued communication is so key. It will help to reduce other forms of academic dishonesty in your course. So having reminders, not just in your course line, but course outline rather, but throughout D2L and your statements that you're making in your assessments and being really clear about what's acceptable. I did have one instructor last term who allowed students to use ChatGPT on a specific assessment, but had questions that they had to answer specific to that if they chose to. So here's the assignment. This is what I'd like you to do. And if you choose to use this, there's this additional work that I need you to complete, which was really neat because it incorporated that and allowed the students to use it if they wanted to, but gave them clear expectations around identifying what it was. Explain why permissive use is permitted versus not permitted. So kind of similar to what Rebecca was saying about that one, the one small policy you could find. It just needs to be clear to your students. So, you know, when we find that there's appeals that come through under the policy where, say, an appeal is won and a charge is dropped, it's usually because the messaging wasn't clear and the student ought to have reasonably known that what they were doing is wrong, and they didn't, right? Encouraging questions and discussion and open discussion. So asking your students to let you know and to communicate with you, because it's really interesting. We had a task force this summer and we had obviously representation from our student body. And it's really interesting to see how students are using these tools to benefit them in terms of their, you know, just their research. So have open conversations and be open to listening and accepting new ways to try to do things. We have a kind of a national body that gets together in terms of research integrity and research misconduct. And general question that came out from the Secretary on Responsible Conduct of Research was, has anyone started to look at generative artificial intelligence and your research integrity at your institution? And there was dead silence. And then one by one, institutions said, oh, but we have a teaching and learning task force and we're focusing on the teaching and learning right now. So I really think we're going to start to see some really clear messaging. We've started to see some coming out from journals around generative artificial intelligence, what is acceptable, what isn't. And I think that messaging is going to be shortly following in terms of the research world. And I know for sure Dr. Knights, our acting vice president of research, will be kind of pulling his team together and already has us coming together this fall to discuss research integrity aspects and how we're going to incorporate it and have a clear message from the institution. So this is really going to be flexible over the next little while in terms of things will be changing and fluid as we all learn how to use it and what level will be acceptable, what won't be acceptable. So any questions though, by all means, reach out to my office. I am a one-person office, but I will be posting this fall to have someone come in to assist with academic integrity. And so the two of us will be available to answer any questions and help you kind of manage any potential concerns that might come up.
No, for me, I'm always kind of, you know, I hear a lot of people using it more for like reference letter writing and all of that. And I do wonder how, you know, we mentioned applicants maybe after the fact that they start their, you know, courses, etc. That these things might be noticed. I do wonder how, you know, other people submitting various documents for them, like how does that impact their situation in the university?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding correctly, if I'm the faculty member writing a reference letter using generative AI, how does that help or hurt?
Help her, yeah, you're
Yeah, I think
the
that's,
student. I think again that's one of those concerns.
yeah, I think it just really depends on the level of personalization that goes into that letter. So you could write, then ChatGPT would write a very generic one. Are there discussions, plans to move away from online non-supervised assessments? Yes, there are. So some departments, programs, faculties are thinking about in-person assessment as one way to know for sure that a student is able to do the skills. So that's showing up in the humanities, the social sciences, and sort of in-person proctored kinds of assessment. Introduces challenges for accommodation and accessibility, but also balanced against the ideas of being confident in what students can do. There's some thought around that continued flipped classroom of even more sort of work happening to prepare for class, and then having the classroom setting the place where assessment might happen in discussion and group engagement on application of skills. I will say the idea of presentations often comes up. If you want to have a video recorded presentation to ensure that there's an opportunity in the presentation for question and answer, to Kim's point about that conversational part, a generative AI tool can absolutely produce a presentation for you. So you want to make sure that there's that chance to query and have a conversation with your students about it. I think for the reference letter part, it would fall to each person. There's no guidelines right now at the institution around reference letter writing. Do you have any thoughts on that one? Other questions? Yeah.
So you definitely mentioned within your portion of the presentation some of the things that it can do and some of the things that it can't do.
Yeah.
With the discussions that are occurring at the moment around generative artificial intelligences, do you think a lot of the discussions seem to be guided a little bit more by possible concern or actual capacity at the moment? If that question isn't framed properly, I will try again.
No, I understand the question. I think you're saying like, are the AI safety community, are they worried about what's right now, or are they worried about potentiality?
Or even at the university level, so be it an ethics department, be it
No, I
journals,
think like-
are they concerned about what they think it can do or what it can do?
What it can do. So there's been a
Okay.
number of prominent retractions of journal articles that
Okay.
are found have been written by ChatGPT. I know your office has seen a number of academic integrity inquiries based on just last winter.
Yeah.
I think from the AI safety perspective, there's lots of concern about what the tools can do right now around disinformation and deep faking as some of the more prominent sort of ability to shift political discourse in ways that are concerning. Good question, and then we go to Lou. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So my question was, I know they had the task force over the summer, particularly at university-wide, and you mentioned up to AI training for medical school. Are there going to be opportunities to contribute to that? Are there going to be discussions, have those started, how to get involved with those?
Yeah. So Kim skipped over, which was reasonable because we were out of time. It's totally fine. The task force that was focused on teaching and learning had a number of folks from your area of FHS as part of that task force. That task force concluded at the end of August. This report, the final report, should be on the Provost website by the end of the week. The next step coming out of that task force is likely to be an institutional advisory committee that combines teaching and learning, research, and the world of work. Just thinking about how generative AI impacts all. Decisions about the structure of those committees' mandates will take the fall to sort out. So stay tuned.
Maybe Anita first and then Paula's question.
Anita, curious how the tool impact medical school admission processes such as essays, reference letters, etc. Agree, Anita. I've been trying to follow how people are approaching this in the admissions world. Would be really interested to hear from you folks on how you continue to navigate that. I think the piece around in person, if there's interview kinds of opportunities, I don't know how you take, how many applicants do you get? Thousands? Yeah, many thousands. How do you?
5,000 applications, 500
Yeah.
invited to interview.
Yeah. So you could
552.
So you can have an interview stage. Omar shared with me earlier today, there's a generative AI tool called Character AI that will play the role of a character for you. One of them is an interviewer, an HR specialist, so you can practice your interview.
One of the problems we're running into is that over the pandemic, most in-person interviews were shifted to virtual spaces using the Kira platform, which has an asynchronous component. So your prompt gets, you make your prompt and then you have a minute to think about it before you record your answer. And we're hearing about schools calling applicants back and making in-person interviews because they've been using generative AI in that minute to make their answers.
We've done some, I mean, it's a very small scale analogy. We used to send people the interview questions an hour in advance as a gesture towards accessibility, and found that applicants were generating generative AI responses this week. It opens up a whole set of questions around accommodation and accessibility that I don't have good answers to yet, but I'm really interested to explore.
And it shifts what are we assessing people for?
Absolutely
the
right.
technology is available, presumably we want to be able to use it.
Yeah.
So what are the competencies and attributes that we're
Actually
interested in?
Yep.
I think we have like a minute or two left. So just I think what Paula was asking about could AI use the judge and actually level the playing field somewhat for the more privilege and less privilege.
Paula, there's a article out that I will have to send as a follow-up. It's something about the jagged frontier that came out from 3 Harvard business researchers who did exactly that, looking at efficiency, productivity, and quality of work, and found that the high performers continued to perform reasonably well, but the sort of mediocre employees suddenly were achieving at the same level as the high performers. So I was devastated because I've always been the top of my class, only to discover that now everyone else will be equally good. Yes, I think that sort of privilege, bias, equity perspective is there, but also just in terms of quality of output.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much.